The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Such is the life these days. Such is the life. There's just a constant influx of germs, and here we go again. So for the second time in 3 weeks, I am sick. I was a little bit worried about it yesterday. Really fought my way through that mailbag show. I was fighting it, man. I was pausing often to take sips of warm water. And, then it came in a little bit harder last evening. And I thought I had dodged this one, people. I really thought I had, because I had like this weird semi-cold that never really turned into anything. And then my wife got sick, and then the kid got sick. And I thought, oh, maybe I started it. But no, it was the wife again. Brought it home from the hospital, got the kid sick, and then the kid's going to get me sick because, hanging out with him half of the day. But we're going to get through this thing, and luckily, I have a fantastic guest on today's podcast. It's Thursday, it's Fantasy NBA Today. I am Dan Besbris, and we are looking ahead to tomorrow. Tomorrow's DFS day here this week because of the Christmas New Year holiday. We got our Beat the Expert contest on Friday this week. I have no idea when it's going to be next week, so don't ask me yet, but the week after that, presumably it'll go back to Wednesday. With the weird schedule, we pushed it back this week. The room is open, the party begins, and we welcome to the show the expert of Beat the Expert fame in our contest, Mike Apotria. Good morning to you.
Morning, Dan. It's what is it? About 12:30 over here.
Oh, I guess it's not morning for you, is it? You're an you're an East Coaster. You're a right coast. I'm a left coast. It's 9:30 a.m. here on the Pacific Coast, but it is afternoon in some places. So good afternoon to you. But you also work late, so this is still kind of your morning, right?
Definitely. I'm always up, or I guess you could say up late. I'm up early the next day either way. My bartend on the weekends to pay the rent still on the side until, that degree gets fully used full time. But, it'll hopefully sooner rather than later. But, out some days at 3, 4 a.m. and then I'm up the next day at 7, 8 sometimes. So you get some naps in between though. So I'll be definitely looking forward to the nap later.
Yeah, the nap later. That's a good call. I guess this segues into a pretty nice little promo opportunity. Mike, how do you wake up in the morning on short sleep?
You were just saying, how do you have all this energy right now? And
that's right.
It's the coffee. It's the Hawaiian Islands Kona coffee. I will not stop talking about them. I'm tweeting about them. They don't pay me. I work for Hoop Ball. This is straight off. This is straight free promo. I'll give it to them all day long. It's fantastic. I told you guys weeks ago, since I've tried them, I literally haven't even thought about going back to any other type of coffee. My girlfriend wants to stop at Starbucks sometimes once in a while. I said, I'll wait till I get home. It's already there. It's cheaper. It's better. It's give it a shot if you haven't. It's 100% worth the investment.
Yeah, thank you for swinging after I put that ball on the tee. I appreciate that. That's what I'm here for, man, especially when I'm feeling ill. I'm just going to put the ball on the tee, and then all you got to do is take a big old rip at it. So for those that were unable to listen to some of our previous DFS episodes with Mike, he's been helping us figure out how to win this thing, and lo and behold, last week, I did. I didn't win it. I didn't get first place, but I got in the top 10, and I won money, and my next 10 contests are funded, and hopefully longer than that. Let's hope I can win another one in there. So I guess I should start the show by just saying, Mike, thanks, man.
You're welcome. I mean, I got to thank you because this is, it's coming on the show and talking about these plays that I always have cooped up in my head. And, I love helping people. I love giving the advice, and I can't build as many lineups as I'd like all the time. So it's awesome when I can give some advice and I see somebody who's taken some of it, even if it's a grain of it, even if it's, one thing I said, a hedge play, a pivot play, whatever it may be, having a part of winning, helping somebody win, it's a good feeling on my end, even on nights I lose.
Looking back at last week's contest, which was on Wednesday of last week, so it's 8 days ago now, and I can, memory being foggy though it may be, I remember kind of coming down to the wire with a couple of guys, but on the show that day, we had talked about playing some replacement level dudes for the Toronto Raptors, and one of them worked out for me, and one of them worked out a little bit less. The Moose was loose. Greg Monroe, who was like, I don't know if he cost anything. I don't remember what his price tag was that day, but it was crazy low, and he logged 25 points, which is solid for somebody you're paying nobody for. Fred VanVleet, who cost a little bit more, had kind of a rough one in his backup role. I think he ended up shooting like 2 for 16 that game, so the opportunity was there, but the other stuff didn't fall into place. Is there any way to game plan for that, or you just, it's one small sample size? Like, sometimes you do the right thing, and sometimes it just doesn't work out perfectly.
So it's like we talked about, like you said last week. Fred VanVleet, he was in a great opportunity to fill in and start. And I guess you could call him that chalkier play. So the only thing I would say is if you look back on the contest, he was 50.8% owned, meaning literally more than half the people in our contest had Fred VanVleet. So in the chance that he does have an off game like he did, you'd gain an edge on 50% of the competition by either playing a similar priced point guard, like a pivot play, I would call them, who did slightly better at less ownership, or just avoided it altogether and went to a different route. But it was a good spot. I played him in some lineups. You can't knock yourself for playing it. He could have, like you said, if he shot a little better, he would have got there. But then the only thing I would have said, looking at the matchup, it wasn't one that I would probably be targeting guards in anyway, even if it was Lowry starting. I was looking at taking advantage of the lower priced guy, like you said, the Monroe. Pascal Siakam, he's always a look when I know that Leonard's going to be out, and on top of it, I believe Ibaka was out this night too. That's why we were targeting Monroe. So you already knew he was going to get time at power forward and center. Our goal was to hope to get Monroe playing 30 minutes because he would absolutely explode at 25 points. I think it was 4K. That's phenomenal. We'll take that all day long. But if you watch this game, I think he had about 15 or 18 of his DraftKings points in the first quarter. They just really limited his minutes going forward. But what I was saying before is it's not against the Pacers with their backcourt. It's not a spot I generally target guards against. Oladipo's defense has been, stellar all year long, and it's been even better since he's come back from the knee injury. So it's not a spot I would have targeted Lowry specifically, even if he was healthy. And knowing VanVleet was going to be so highly owned, that's a good spot where if you look at your head, it's not a great matchup and everyone's going to be owning him. Maybe it's a good idea to kind of pivot off of that.
We also talked about the Pelicans and the Bucks as a place to look for value as well on last week's card. And I just kind of want to remind everybody what we're working with. That was a game where both Julius Randle and Niko Mirotic had been ruled out for New Orleans in a game that, again, kind of looking back at the numbers, had a Vegas total set at 230, which was the second highest total on the board behind just the OKC-Sacramento game. So I think when we talked about it on the podcast, we were looking at that like, okay, well, how are we going to get to 230 points? Even if it's a 130 to 100 blowout, somebody's going to have to score 100 for the Pels, and there's literally 2 guys left on the roster. And if Anthony Davis doesn't spend, 7 minutes of the first half in the locker room going to the toilet or whatever was going on that day, he could have had a 75-point fantasy game. It still worked out pretty well, though. Drew Holiday had 60, Anthony Davis had 57. By all accounts, that strategy worked. Did you use anybody on the Milwaukee side? I ended up avoiding that side.
I actually did. And what especially in this game, it's going to be a competitive game, I figured. So if it's going to be a competitive game, there's got to be points coming from somewhere. And, when I'm playing a star, like I played Anthony Davis, I was all over Anthony Davis, and I had somebody tweet at me, I wish you didn't recommend him on the pod. He had 29 points in DraftKings points in the first quarter.
Yeah.
He was on pace to explode. He was on pace to like an 80-point game, and he would have completely changed everyone's night around. But when I know I'm playing 1 to 2 guys on the side of the ball, you don't always need to, but it makes sense correlation-wise sometimes to run it back, saying it's going to be a close game, and especially if you get one of those times where you had overtime. Now you have 3 or 4 of the star players going into overtime. You're looking at a discounted salary. If I overpaid for Bledsoe, and I had Marcus tweeted at me and he said, I'm surprised you did that. He's playing Drew Holiday, and that's a great point as well. But I didn't like Middleton that much in that spot. I had a little shares of him. I wasn't paying up for Giannis. So if I was right and it just worked out right, it would have been great. But Bledsoe, he ended up having a poor shooting night. He didn't play a ton of minutes, 9 points, 6 boards, I think 4 assists. Could have been better. But He was also 3.3% owned, and that's another thing I was looking at targeting. I knew he wasn't going to be highly owned, and if he did have one of his 40, 50-point games, that's a big edge on everybody in the contest.
You know, it's funny, too, Mike, looking at your card from last week, you had 292 DraftKings points, and you're talking about it like it was an epic failure of a night. Just turned out that we had a really powerful contest that day. Rowdy 18, the winner, had 352 DraftKings points. 352! That's some bonkers level stuff. Looking at your card, Mike, you had Derrick Rose, who had 49 DraftKings points that night. Anthony Davis had 57. De'Aaron Fox was in your lineup. He had 58. Trevor Ariza was a very affordable 33.5. There were really only like two spots, and we were talking about it before we went on air. There were really only two spots where you sort of took a little hit, and in one of them, you shared that hit with a lot of other teams. Nemanja Bjelica of the Kings got you 19, and then we talked about Bledsoe at 22.5. Is it unusual, and I know I'm pivoting here for the question, is it unusual to have a contest where there are 65, 70 people, and you've got to score 315 to get in the top 10? That feels like a high number.
It's actually not that uncommon, and it's something I referred to before in the past, and it's kind of knowing what kind of slate you're playing is going to dictate how you're building your lineup. You know, tonight, for instance, we have 5 games. So odds are there's not going to be as many high-scoring lineups because there's not as many opportunities as of the random 3.5K guys going for 30 or 40 points. There's less players. So, you know, it's probably going to be a little bit of a lower score tonight. So you don't necessarily need to take as many shots. And this was also a night we knew coming in that we had loads of value. Loads of it. We knew we were going to play Bamba, Monroe, we had Ariza, we had value all over the place. And when you know there's value all over the place and there's 10 games, there's going to be tons of studs to pay up for it. So if you're confident in that value getting to your 20 to 30 points, and you have a ton of studs in your lineup who are in good spots who are going to get you 60 to 80, it's you're looking at like almost like a 300-point floor if everything goes right.
Dang.
So knowing the slate is really going to dictate how risky you have to be with your lineup, when you're going to go with a chalkier guy, or I guess you could take a lower owned guy who might be in a bad spot where you can actually gain some ground on. And you're going to see if you start playing like tonight with the 5-game slates that if you're just really wrong on one spot, like the other night I played Gerald Green in the spot where he only got 10 DraftKings points at a low price, that's really going to hurt you because everybody who doesn't play Gerald Green is going to be a little bit ahead of you, even if he's low owned.
You use the term chalk, and as a gambling man, I think it means something different to me than it does to you. So I want to just go through a little bit of the terminology stuff. By the way, talking to Mike Apotria here, if you guys missed that earlier, at Mike Apotria on Twitter, if you want to give him a follow. Mike, and then the last name is Apotria. Give him a follow. He's our expert here at Hoopball on DFS. Also, by the way, quite good at season long, but that's not why we've got you here on the podcast today. When I talk about chalk in betting, that tends to be laying a large favorite number, which I don't know if that correlates quite to what you're referring to. What does it mean to take a chalk guy? Does that mean somebody who's heavily owned in a contest?
Yeah, it's basically like, last night, the Derrick Rose, he was kind of a chalk play. If Derrick Rose is playing, starting, Jeff Teague's out, playing the Chicago Bulls in Chicago, everybody sees the same thing right off the rip, and he's going to be highly owned.
Okay.
It's one of those plays that it's, Andre Drummond against the Nets. It's the ones that just stand out where everybody sees it right off the rip. It's like, I got to get this guy in my lineup. He's the first guy I'm thinking of. A lot of other people are probably thinking the same way. So guys tend to be chalky and they end up going highly owned. And, on nights where sometimes, Damian Lillard's very chalky, pivoting to CJ McCollum, who's going to be less than half the percent of ownership, and he has one of his better shooting games or even puts up the same amount of points, you're going to get an edge on all those people. So it's worth pivoting in some spots and it's worth not. And again, we talked in the past, sometimes when you're making multiple entries, you have that opportunity to pivot and still feel comfortable with both lineups. And, one of them, if you do everything else right, is bound to hit.
So looking back at last week's card again, as we sort of analyze things from that same perspective, I'm looking at my own lineup right now, and I had 2 guys in my lineup that were more than 50% owned in this particular contest. Mo Bamba, with Nick Vucevic out for a game, was 54% used in this contest, and Freddie VanVleet was 50.8% owned. Anthony Davis was at 44. Trevor Ariza was 39.4. Are those guys all considered chalk plays? What's the cutoff, really? Or is it kind of arbitrary? Like, if somebody's going to be heavily owned, it's a chalk play. If they're not, then it's not.
Okay, so it really depends on the size. So let's go with like the mass tournaments, the large field GPPs, the ones that have like, say 40,000 people.
Oh, good point. Yeah, they're
a
never
chalk
going
play
to
is anything considered 20 to 30% pretty much.
Okay.
Sometimes even in the high teens, because you're talking about a mass field of people, of 40,000 people, and 20% of them have one player, 30% of them have one player. That's a lot of people. So in this contest, you can get away with guys in like, the high 20s, the low 30s. They're not necessarily chalk plays. You're looking at more or less the 40s, the 50s when you're playing the contest with
like a lower number. Okay, I think I get it. Yeah.
So in a contest with 40 or 50, you can get away with a guy in the high 20s, even sometimes the low 30 percentage, because it's not necessarily chalk because there's a lot less people. Especially if you're only trying to finish in the top 10, like we had 61 people last week. So having Ariza at 39% owned isn't as bad. And one thing you have to take into account when it comes to ownership is the price you're paying for the guy and how cheap he actually is. So if you look at like Mohamed Bamba, 54.1%. That's an incredible ownership. That's really high. You would think fading that would be the right solution if you really want to gain an edge in the competition, but he was 3,700 on the night. Vucevic is out. It's a free square if you're playing bingo. That's literally what it is. It's very, very hard for him to bust. You're not paying, like even Van Fleet. I don't remember exactly what he was. He was probably low 5Ks or high 4Ks, maybe even a little bit more. You're paying a little bit more for the same ownership for a guy. So Van Fleet needs to get you a little bit more at the same time. But we're talking about two guys looking to play the same amount of minutes. It's different positions, but the price difference in the gap is so much different that if Bamba even busts, I'm not worried about his 15 to 20 points as much because I paid 20 or paid 3.7K for him necessarily. If you're looking at a guy like we were talking about before, Andre Drummond against the Nets, let's say, and he's 50% owned, you need him to get 50 points because you're paying 9K for him. You're paying a lot for him. So the odds of him busting are still a little bit greater.
Okay, so now we're really getting into the weeds on this thing. By the way, folks, if you want to join our DFS contest, we've been tweeting the links out pretty regularly. They go out like 5 to 10 times a day, I would think, from the Hoopball Twitter, from mine, from Mike's. You can find it at any one of those locations. It's at Mike Apotria, at Dan Besbris, at Hoopball Fantasy, or at Hoopball Tweets. Any of those four, you will find this DFS contest. You can also let either of us know or let somebody know if you want to get on our mailing list. We're just starting it. It's brand new as of last week. And the only emails that go out through this mailing list right now are DFS contest alerts. So when the room opens, I send out the email. I'm doing it myself from our mailing account at Hoopball. And if you want to get the alert that way, then let me know. And the best way to let me know is also still, by the way, on Twitter. If you don't have a Twitter account, just open one up. It takes you 90 seconds. Send me a note at Dan Besbris. Hey, put me on your mailing list. I'll get your email address. We'll get you on there. And then you can get an alert every week when we open the room. So getting into the weeds a little bit here, Mike, you're talking about when you go with and when you dodge the chalk plays. And I think we started to touch on this on last week's episode, but I want to explore a little bit further in this one. You mentioned Mo Bamba as like a free square in bingo. That's a fantastic way to look at it because you're like, look, everybody's going to use him. He's a super cheap play, but if I don't use him, I'm putting myself behind everyone else for no reason. How do you separate? Like you were talking about Derrick Rose as a chalky play in Chicago, or looking back at last week like a Freddie Van Fleet as a chalky play that really didn't pan out. How do you know when one of those is a free square versus not a free square? Was it just the matchup? Was it the price? Was it a combination thereof? It feels to me like some of this is feel because you've been doing this for a while.
It is a lot of it's feel, but it's not something that the average person can't look and figure out themselves if they just take the time as well. I mean, Bamba's matchup wasn't a good one, but he was still a free square. He's playing San Antonio. It's going to be a slower game, and they also got crushed, 129-90. So he didn't even get all the time he possibly could have. But when you look at it, you also have to look at the other options you have, and like I said, the slate. So if you're looking at playing, let's say, Derrick Rose, for instance, and he's chalk, and you wanted to avoid Derrick Rose. And again, that's one guy I thought was a free square going against Chicago. You had to play him. It's cheap enough. But if you wanted to go against it, if you have to factor in, you have to do a little bit of game planning. And if Derrick Rose has a bad game, and they're playing the Bulls, so you're not expecting them to get blown out, especially being Tibbs coaching. He's not going to let that happen. Who's going to be the guy that has the big game? It's got to be maybe Covington. It's got to be Towns. So if you're not playing Rose, you got to look at the other option, who it could be. Another thing you got to do is, maybe if you're not playing Rose at point guard or shooting guard, look at the other options around that same price range. If there's another guy you feel really, really comfortable with, that you think is in just as good of a spot or very close to spot, but he's going to be at a much lesser ownership at the same price, that's a pivot. That's the perfect pivot you can make right there, because now everybody else is going to go towards Rose. And let's say Josh Richardson, 6,700, and dream matchup, no Dragic, no Winslow against the Suns or something like that. That's a pivot right there. He's probably going to be highly owned in that situation as well. But the same price, you can get away with playing him and gain an edge on everybody that played Rose if he has a bad game.
Okay, so let's pivot then from looking back at what we learned from last week to what we've got coming up. And we don't have the numbers for our Friday contest today, so I think maybe I'll just have you tell me what to do for tonight. I'm not probably making a card for tonight because I like to just play in our hoopball contest. That's just me. But if folks out there want to get into some of the other stuff, where would you begin to look? It's a busier Thursday than usual. I mean, it's not like an action-packed Thursday, but it's 5 games instead of 2, so at least that's not nothing. So where do you start in planning for the games tonight? Do you look at the injury news first? And if so, what have we found so far?
So yes, definitely. I look at the injury news. It's kind of like we talked about last week. Injury news, totals, game totals, 2 of the first things I always look at. I want to know which games I'm targeting right off the rip, why I'm targeting them, and which players are the best options immediately. And then, the guys that are kind of secondary options, those are the guys I look to in my multiple lineups, kind of the pivot off of my expensive options in case they bust. Well, then maybe the cheaper guy or the backup is the guy I put in the other lineup, and he ends up saving my night because of one lineup. But the first place I'm looking is, we know LeBron James is out. He didn't travel with the team, and if that's not the first place you're looking on this night in a matchup against Sacramento, high-scoring game, fast-paced game, you're going to lose a lot of money very, very fast. So we have Golden State on there. All the Golden State guys are priced accordingly, but we know we also have Rondo out. So Lonzo Ball just seems like he's close to a must play for me at 5,500. Ball in his hands the whole time. Good matchup. Him and Fox, they like to play against each other as well. Ingram's getting a boost at a fair price, 5,800. Kuzma is going to see a good amount of time, play a lot of the 4 now, as well as the 3. His price is up there a little bit more. I think he's going to have an excellent game. So when I just say those 3 guys, those are the 3 primary guys I'm probably targeting on that Lakers side of the ball. But Kuzma being the price he is, 7,400, you really need like a 40-point, 45-point game for him to really, really cash in if these other guys still do good. So if that's the guy, if we know we need a little bit more from him than Ingram and Ball, he's probably the guy I would look to pivot off of in some of my lineups and still play a little bit more Ball and Ingram. And then, like I said, there's the cheap options. Like we know that Kentavious Caldwell-Pope's going to see a little bit of a boost off the bench. He's going to play a little bit more minutes. He's going to get a couple more shot attempts. It's just going to be a ton of value all over the place. We got Zubac if McGee does, in fact, not play. I believe he traveled. But there's so many options just on the Lakers side that we need to have at least 2 to 3 of these guys in all of our lineups almost, because we know LeBron's usage with him off the court now, and especially with Rondo off the court as well. And then you have to run it back almost with at least 1 or 2 Kings. So it's like I'm attacking the slate heavily on that game and then playing a few guys from the other games. Really hoping Harden was going to be out. Then you got a ton of value all over the place over there as well. And we can just load it up on studs.
He might be. It seems like he might be just based on the fact that Boston is currently a 2-point road favorite. That feels like a Vegas believes Harden is not playing tonight line.
I see. I was leaning the same way, and I believe it was a Dallas beat writer. I think it was, believe it or not, Tim McMahon, who said they're planning on him playing, and he's gearing up to play, but he's still being ruled as questionable. So, and that's where I'm saying it's good to have those backup options sometimes, and even if you're making multiple lineups, maybe do one with Harden, one without. But he's a lot of money to completely go all in on if you're making multiple lineups and play Harden in every single lineup. If we don't have that news, if we do have the news, well, we do have a ton of value. We have James Harden at a fair price still, because we know we have no Paul in a matchup where I'm imagining it stays very competitive if Harden is in fact playing. At 11-3, I'm going to have some shares of him. That's just guaranteed. But We do still have Austin Rivers now. They finally put him on DraftKings. He's only 3,400. He's a great value play. 31 minutes last game. Even though he's not scoring a ton of points, 3,400, you're not looking for a lot, and it allows you to squeeze in a few more studs who we know are in great spots. Like De'Aaron Fox, I'm a big fan of tonight against the Lakers. 8K, fast-paced matchup. We know we have to get something from these Kings guys in these matchup. Belica you can go back to as a nice solid value play. Just in this game, there's just so much. And then there's also the narratives that we have to keep an eye on. The one I always talk about that I always love to target is Damian Lillard going to Golden State, playing in front of his hometown, playing in front of his friends and family. They always come out. He usually always performs against Golden State. They played one time this year, and he had 44 DraftKings points in 34 minutes. He shot the ball 24 times. He's dirt cheap at his price, too. 8,300 is very cheap for Lillard. So there's a way that you can just squeeze in and pound in these studs and still get value all across the board.
Sounds like you almost just gave us your entire card.
You know what, Dan? I like to come on here and give the fans what they want.
Maybe I'll go into one of them $1 contests and just throw it out there and see what happens. I think I'm technically a beginner because the only games I've played on DraftKings are our hoopball contests. So I have like 4 contests under my belt, so I can go hang out with the noobs. This could be fun. Maybe I can go make $1.
I'm so glad you said that, because that's one thing I preach to my friends who, I always get my buddies and they're like, they see, they hear and they see that I'm winning money doing this. And they're like, oh, let me just do a night. And I'm like, listen, you guys have a complete advantage. If you can get information from all over, hoopball, the internet, wherever it is, from pros, from guys who have been doing this for a while, and you're playing against guys who necessarily haven't. That is, you're a shark in a pond right there, because you're getting the advice, against people that don't have it necessarily or don't even know it's out there. It was a long time before I even knew that there was a huge DFS community, and there is one, and there's tons of information. There's tons of stats, tons of data, tons of way to find it, and tons of people looking for it.
Couple of things I want to get into on the logistical side. Before we came on air, Mike, you informed me that there are actually new rules for our 100-person DFS contest, that you can actually submit multiple lineups to the same contest now. I didn't know that was a thing in any contest, let alone our own, but apparently that's now available. Why would somebody want to do that?
It's like I've been saying all along. It's making multiple lineups allows you to play with it a little bit more. You can hedge certain plays. You can pivot off a popular play if you want to take that chance. Or you can just, if you're ever wondering with a 2v2 swap I always talk about, you're never really just swapping one guy unless he's the same position and same price. You can take that chance, and if the 2 guys bust or one of the guys busts, you have that other lineup where your other 6 core guys were doing great, and you have another chance. It's like having another life. It's awesome. It's an advantage you can completely take advantage of. And in our contest, we have 100 spots where now you can make 3 lineups per person, which now that we're talking about it, odds are it's going to fill up a lot faster as well, that more people know this. I didn't know this until going back through and seeing that we had a couple people that did catch up on it and put 2 or 3 in there. Listen, it's in there, it's set up. There's no way it's changing. I might not necessarily put 3 in just so we can get a lot of our listeners and everybody else to kind of experiment with doing multiple lineups a little bit more in this contest. So I might just stick to the one, which drives me crazy. I wish I knew this the past 2 weeks, is I'm always tossing around between 1 or 2 lineups, and I generally always pick the wrong one. And then, my other GPPs, of course. But this is, like I said, this is our contest, Dan. This is the one that we care about the most. It's our baby. We're building it up.
That's right.
And I want another T-shirt. I want that T-shirt.
I want more money. That's what I want. That's that's what drives me. Can if you submitted 3 teams, could you win all 3? I mean, it'd be hard, but could you actually, can you only win with one of your 2 lineups, or could you actually win with both?
Oh, you can win with all. Yeah, you can win with both easily. And you'll see that if you play the large field GPP sometimes, the guys that play multiple entries, some of them are 20 entry max, some of them up to 150 entries. And that's where you see a lot of guys take advantage that once they do build that big bankroll and they could afford to play tons and tons of lineups, they can take the chances on like those Nerlens Noels on random nights like we were talking about weeks ago. And those guys, when their core is all, if you get like your 7 or 8 or 7 or 6 guys all right on, like, you just nail that core. Like, even if you made one lineup and then you do just swap that last guy or the last 2 guys and they all still do very well. I've seen contests where, and I've had contests where there's sometimes you're 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and you still win a ton of money because all the main guys you played in all of them did well, and the one guy you swapped out in each of the other one did well as well. So you see sometimes guys finish first, second, fourth, and eighth or something like that, and they're taking home a lot of money because of it.
All right, next week we're going to get into some more strategy. The Great Mike Apotria contest, again, is tomorrow. It's Friday this week. Again, I do not know when it's going to be next week. It'll go back to Wednesdays when we're out of the holiday season. Mike, you are the man. I'm going to try to win this thing again. Thank you for shepherding me into the land of the in the money, and thank you for another wonderful lesson on DFS. I'll talk to you soon.
Always a pleasure, Dan. Thank you for having me.
The wonderful Mike Apotria. Love it, especially when I'm not feeling great. Opportunity to sit back and learn a few things. Hope you guys enjoy that as much as I do. Get you ready for that DFS contest tomorrow. We'll be tweeting about it. We'll be tweeting about it all day. Mike has to work tomorrow at like an hour before lineups lock, so you better get at him early. If you have questions about the card tonight, you can hit him on Twitter, as we just mentioned, at Mike Apotria. I'm probably going to do it. I think I might jump in, and like I said there, I might take a crack at one of these $1 contests and just see what happens. I think they might even have, they used to have free contests back in the day that I screwed around with just to see what would happen. I don't know if those exist anymore. They probably don't. Probably have to pay. And that's okay. I think I've got a pretty good feel for what's going on tonight. Mike mentioned the LeBron stuff, and that's really where you ought to begin. Let's get into some of the season-long stuff now. We've got about a half an hour left on today's show, maybe a little bit less, depending on how the old vocal cords hang up, and look at yesterday, which was a relatively thick Wednesday, 10-game slate. Want to focus our efforts here on a couple of key games. Number one, Phoenix-Orlando. This one, which had no business, by the way, going into overtime. They called a foul while DJ Augustin was shooting a three-pointer at the end of regulation. He made all 3 free throws and ended up with 27 points on the day. It was one of those weird DJ Augustin games where he's going to go from 25 to 40% owned and then back to 25 in a week. But overall, the point that we wanted to make in watching this game, we were watching Jonathan Isaac, who once again struggled. He played just 25 minutes. Did have a couple of shots in the flow of the offense, but they just don't really look for him on the offensive side, which I guess I get it. He's not that skilled offensively yet, but when guys are out there just chucking away, you kind of feel like he deserves a few, right? Terrence Ross, he just gets out there and starts firing like a madman, and it's just not there yet. I think you still have to hold. I know that it's hard every week to sit on this guy. I'm in a keeper league, and in that spot, you absolutely positively have to hold because this kid has crazy skill on the defensive end. But I get it. If he's frustrating the crap out of you, I mean, I think we're going to regret it if anybody lets go of this dude. There's going to come a time, especially now we're seeing Orlando head into a little bit of a slump. They sort of slogged their way to a few wins down in Mexico City, but overall, the Magic are 3-7 in their last 10 games. They're now 5 games under 500 for the year. They're only 2 games out of the last playoff spot in the Eastern Conference, but other teams are playing decidedly better than they are. And I just wonder, how far are they going to push this thing? Honestly, at this point, they're currently on a 4-game losing streak. If this thing extends to 6 or 7, that might be the point at which they said, okay, well, now it's time to start shopping some of our guys. Because when they were playing well, you could understand maybe trying to make a push, get a little era of good feelings going. But the wheels are coming off a little bit. They're not good at home. They haven't been great on the road lately. They've been okay, actually, within their division at 3-3. But overall, things have gotten a little bit goofy. So as soon as they move somebody, then everybody gets a boost. And you got to figure they're looking to move guys like Evan Fournier, DJ Augustin, Nick Vucevic, even Terrence Ross, I would think, who's not a spring chicken. They've got room for guys like Jonathan Isaac, for guys like Mo Bamba. Aaron Gordon is locked in there for a while. There's an avenue here where things open up for Orlando, and we want to be ready if or when they do. Some of these guys you could pick up later on, like I'm guessing Mo Bamba is probably not owned in your competitive leagues because he hasn't been, in your less competitive leagues, he's way over-owned. guys. He's owned in all of my competitive leagues, and he's number 215 on the year. But I think it's a lot of people just sitting on a Nick Vucevic move, where, let's say they do trade Vooch, then Bamba becomes a monster. What if they trade... I think that even opens things up a little bit for a guy like Jonathan Isaac. What if they trade Evan Fournier or Jonathan Simmons or a lot of these guys moving out of the way? Every time a minute opens, it's just a minute that they can be a little bit more fluid with the young guys on the team. But really what we learned from this game was coming from the Phoenix side. And yes, Jamal Crawford was out, so we saw 24 minutes of Elie Okobo that probably wouldn't have happened under normal circumstances. But aside from that, you got 40 minutes for Devin Booker, again, overtime game, so roughly take about 5 minutes off for most of these guys. 31 minutes for Kelly Oubre, 36 minutes for TJ Warren, 34 minutes for DeAndre Ayton, and 35 minutes for Mikal Bridges. You also got 27 minutes out of Josh Jackson off the bench, and 19 from Richaun Holmes. The Holmes number is fine. That's about where we expected he would be. Remember, my Christmas wish list was 20 minutes for Richaun, and honestly, I'll be fine with 19. He looked great. He was the start of their turnaround in yesterday's game with his defense. Yes, I know. Sometimes you actually have to do some stuff on that side of the ball. So he's obviously a guy that's a hold right now. And Devin Booker, TJ Warren, DeAndre Ayton, those are guys that all belong on your fantasy teams. The question marks that we had coming into this game were Kelly Oubre, Mikal Bridges, Josh Jackson. To me, those are the guys we were sort of trying to figure out. Josh Jackson missed both of his free throws. He made 5 out of his 9 shots, which is unusual, and the fact that he only took 9 shots in 27 minutes is probably a positive sign for him. I think in general he'll take more than that. Kelly Oubre actually had the third highest usage on the team behind Booker and Warren, and that number is going to bounce around a little bit because Jackson will, at some point, grab some usage, and there will be that struggle. But the guy that doesn't have any is Mikal Bridges. He took 8 shots in 35 minutes and made only 2 of them. On most games, he's taking wide open looks, so presumably he'll be able to shoot, I would think, 43% or better. I know a lot of his looks are from downtown, and that's why I'm not aiming much higher. If he makes one more three-pointer in yesterday's game, and I know it was overtime, so it's like, well, why can't we have a giant line? If he makes one more three-pointer, you're talking about 2 threes, a steal, a block, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists. I like the outlook for Mikal Bridges a lot. I also like the outlook for Kelly Oubre. I think both of these guys belong on your fantasy team, at least to see how this thing shakes out. But in the early going here, and Phoenix is playing well right now, which lends me to believe that they like what they're doing and they like their rotations, Bridges and Oubre are both going to play, and you're just going to get very little point guard stuff going on for this team. When Crawford comes back, he'll take the minutes from Okobo we saw yesterday, so those are probably not going to come from Oubre or Bridges. They like Bridges' defense. He's better on that side of the ball than most of the other dudes on this team. And for that reason, I'm putting him on my fantasy teams. He belongs on your club, and I think he's going to have a solid rest of the year. He looks like that 3-and-D guy with upside we were hoping for, and it looks like they're going to give him some time. Is Josh Jackson worth owning? I gave him the points league go-ahead, and I think I'd probably hold him in a pointsy format, but not 9-cat. He never made it on my radar in 9-cat, and that's not changing anytime soon. Washington was another team we were watching yesterday, but with Otto Porter out, I don't think we learned a whole lot. We got 28 minutes from Jan Mahimi, who took those away from Thomas Bryant and actually played relatively well and then fouled out. And no, if you're wondering, I'm not buying into it. I don't think Jan Mahimi's suddenly going to start playing 30 minutes a game. Jeff Green got into early foul trouble. They needed somebody else up front because Drummond and Griffin were too big for the Wizards to just play Markieff Morris at center the whole game. So this is a little bit fluky. I do think Markieff Morris is going to be doing enough to be owned at least until Otto Porter comes back, and then maybe beyond that point, so he should probably be on fantasy radars. He's not going to have many huge games with everybody healthy on this team, but he's probably right at the back end of a standard 12-team, 9-category mix, just because he can contribute in a few different statistical categories. I wasn't really paying attention to Charlotte or Brooklyn, but I feel like we do need to make mention of it because they ended up going to double overtime in this game, and so people went crazy. My guy, Old Man Marv, 14 and 12, 3 threes, a steal, and 2 blocks. Gotta like that. Jeremy Lamb bounced back after a quiet, month, really, with a huge performance. And Kemba Walker was solid. I don't know what the hell's going on with Nick Batum. He's not interested. Curix, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing Rodions wrong. Rodions, Curix. He was a guy that I'll admit I was sort of skeptical about because it seemed like he was just jacking all the minutes that were going to go to Allen Crabbe. I'm wondering if he hasn't perhaps played himself into a role even after Crabbe comes back. And we got word this morning that he finally went through practice, so Crabbe might very well play in the next ball game, which, by the way, is the same 2 teams again, Charlotte and Brooklyn. And if he does, well, let's see where the minutes come from. I think Curix deserves a spot on a roster. I think you pick him up and you just sort of see how this plays out. If you want to bench him with Crabbe's return just to see how many minutes he might actually get, I'm okay with that as well. But in looking at the way they played their guys yesterday, it was actually Jarrett Allen who suffered against what ended up being a kind of a small ball Charlotte look as well. That'll change, I think, from a night-to-night basis. You saw Brooklyn go with Rondae Hollis-Jefferson at the center position, which was hugely helpful for his fantasy line, but that's not going to be the case every night. This was a very big game for Rondae. There's no denying that. I've been very down on him, but this was a big one, and he's a guy that is now back onto the watch list again as he fluctuates between terrible and okay fantasy games, and then this one easily his biggest. But, of course, again, 43 minutes, double overtime. He ain't playing 43 minutes in a normal game, and he played 17 in their win over Phoenix the previous game. So, with a grain of salt, friends, his percentages are bad. He's still number 240 on the year. One giant game is going to float his value, but even over the last week, he's number 182 because he's been clanging free throws at a high volume, and he's turning the ball over a lot. So let's not fall in love with him just yet. It's very popcorny, no threes. He did have 3 blocks in yesterday's game, but the steals and blocks have not been that high overall on the year. He's heavily owned because of namesake. He's at 55%, so there probably aren't that many places you can grab him anyway. But he does belong on a watch list to see if something like yesterday could actually replicate itself, even with Allen Crabbe back. And once Karis LeVert returns, I'm not sure that he has any value at all. So there's a timestamp on this. Joe Harris, when he's hot, he is hot beyond hot. And he is right now, and he's pushed himself back up inside the top 100. So use him while he's rolling along. He's made 3 or more three-pointers in 7 consecutive ball games. By the way, he too will take a hit when Allen Crabbe comes back, who I think, by the way, probably deserves a roster spot. Crabbe was starting to play better right before he got injured. You can look at his last month, which includes the last few games before he got hurt, and he was inside the top 90 in that stretch because he was making a boatload of three-pointers and not turning the ball over. So he's a guy that I assume when he gets worked back into shape, he's going to see the regular amount of minutes. It's just tough to tell, and that's why with Brooklyn, I think you pick up at least some of these guys, Harris, Curix, and then just sort of see how it evolves. See how it evolves in a game that's only 48 minutes long instead of 58. And then Rondae, again, you throw him on your watch list and see what happens in the next one before going out and buying the whole cow. Indiana-Atlanta was not a game I was particularly interested in, but I will point out Jeremy Lin is a stat magnet. 12 points, 5 assists, a steal, a block, 2 3-pointers. It only took him 20 minutes to get there. Damn, I wish he played 24 minutes a game. Damn. I didn't start Darren Collison yesterday, so you're welcome, because apparently me putting him on my bench allowed him to go for 11 points, 8 assists, and 5 rebounds, so at least he bought himself some more time on your team. Miami was another team we were watching on yesterday's card. I want to spend a minute or two there to basically say to you, friends, that they are entering the too many bodies territory again. Yes, Goran Dragic is out for 2 months, but everybody else is back except for Dion Waiters, and everybody gets to play except for poor Wayne Ellington. Poor Wayne Ellington didn't get to see the floor, but everybody else did for this team. And that's a bad thing for fantasy purposes. James Johnson, 29 minutes. Hassan Whiteside, 31. Justice Winslow, 33. Tyler Johnson, 29. Josh Richardson, 36. Kelly Olynyk, only 17. D. Wade, 24. Magruder, 14. Adebayo, 17. Trouble's a brewing, friends, because you've got a guy like James Johnson who sets new levels of low usage last year. He was a little bit more involved yesterday. Had 12 points, 6 boards, 2 steals, and 2 3-pointers on 5 out of 9 shooting. Does he become relevant? Can Justice Winslow stay relevant? He's been shooting the ball really well, but we know what always happens to Justice. Tyler Johnson came off the bench in yesterday's game because they want Winslow as the primary point guard, but Tyler Johnson still had 12, 6, and 6 with 3 steals, a block, and 2 3-pointers in another strong ball game. This is going to be hard to decipher on a night-to-night basis, and when it becomes like effectively the roll of the dice that it was yesterday, you start to lean towards more droppings than pickings. And what I mean by that is Josh Richardson belongs on your team. Hassan Whiteside belongs on your team, although I don't know that you can start him while he's got this insane case of the yips at the free throw line. He's been unbelievably bad, like setting new precedents for the universe bad at the free throw line. He hasn't made a free throw in either of his last 2 ball games, so it's actually getting worse before it's getting better. He's now shooting 43% at the foul line on 4.5 attempts per game. His other stuff is fantastic, but it doesn't matter because he's single-handedly losing you a category, and that makes him an unusable player. I know you feel like you need his rebounds and his blocks, but you can't use him while this is going on at the free throw line. But you also can't drop him because if somehow he gets this thing sorted out and starts shooting 70% at the foul line like he did last year, then he's a top 50 guy with the other stuff he's putting up right now. Because rebounds at 13, blocks at 2.6, 0.6 steals, 52% from the field. All of that stuff is top 50 level numbers or better. But the free throws are making him, since this all started about a month ago, number 140. He's shooting 15% at the free throw line over that stretch. That's rough. 140 with 15% at the free throw line. He's the worst impact free throw guy in the NBA, and it's not close. But we're not here to pick on Hassan Whiteside because, frankly, I actually like what he's been doing in the other parts of his game. We're here to try to figure out who belongs on your fantasy team. Justice Winslow, you know my take on him. He's still more of a points league guy. I know he's been playing well even in 9-cat formats lately. Over the last week, he's number 28, and there's no arguing that that's a good thing. But also over that last week, he's shooting a wildly unsustainable 58% from the field, and he's not taking any free throws, so he's not able to hurt you in that department. But it's never going to stay like that, folks. He averages 2 free throws a game, and he shoots 67% at the foul line. He's a career 41% shooter. These things have a way of leveling off. He's not just going to magically become a 52% shooter from the field. It doesn't happen that way. So to me, he's actually kind of a sell high guy right now because he's got a lot of buzz around his name. He's their starting point guard with Dragic out. He's got 2 months of value. That's worth using for somebody. But you get rid of him before he starts going 4 out of 16 from the field where this thing all balances out, and maybe you can turn him into something, even if it's just as a kicker, like we talked about with Larry Nance Jr. on a previous show. You throw him in as a bonus prize, and you turn a 4th-round pick into a 3rd-round pick with Winslow as the guy that helps make that happen. Tyler Johnson, you should have him on your team right now just to see how this thing goes. Kelly Olynyk and Derek Jones Jr. are likely drops right now unless Whiteside misses time. We heard he might have a hip thing going on, but Kelly has been pushed out by James Johnson. They basically split the power forward minutes during yesterday's game with Adebayo getting all of the backup center minutes. And if those guys are in a timeshare and it's just whoever plays better on a nightly basis, that means that Olynyk is capped out at about 26 or 27 minutes a game on good nights. And on bad nights, he's at 17, and that averages out to 22, which isn't enough in traditional 12-team formats. Deeper leagues, yes, he's probably still worth using. I'm actually looking at James Johnson right now as a guy to put on the watch list. He's not going to be particularly heavily owned. He's available in more than half of my competitive leagues. And we know what he's been able to do in the past. He's a guy that is serviceable in percentages. He's not going to be good in those things. But when things are clicking the right way, like they were 2 years ago in Miami, he averaged 13, 5, and 4 with a steal, a block, and a three-pointer. So he's a 1-1-1 ceiling in 27 minutes a game. And he got close to that last year while playing with the sports hernia. Never quite turned the corner and got the scoring where it needed to be. And so he ended up sitting just outside the top 100. But he has an opportunity here to kind of force his way inside the top 100. You just want to see the defensive stats. And if he can do that for a few games in a row, then maybe you consider it. But let's not drop anybody of reasonable value on that one. I want to try to blitz through the rest of this card. Those were two of the big ones. Minnesota, Chicago, good to see Zach LaVine back, but I'm not going to make any adjustments to my numbers here because they just got clubbed. By the way, again, Taj Gibson over Dario Saric. And I don't think that's a position battle at this point. And that was basically it. I know it was sort of a weird game in Denver. Juancho Hernan-Gomez had 6 3-pointers, but there are a bunch of guys that are about to come back for the Nuggets, so you're not buying into that one. Clippers got hot, just as we expected they would. Gilgeous-Alexander has gotten pushed out, just as we sort of expected he would. And over on the Kings side, Nemanja Bjelica is rolling with Marvin Bagley out, and we still don't really have a timeline for his return, so you can keep streaming him. And that is the big Wednesday card. Want to take a moment here to preview the Thursday card. We already did the DFS stuff with Apotria earlier on the show, but here's what we're looking at from a fantasy and a gaming perspective on this Thursday evening card. It's a fun one. That's what we're looking for. It's a fun one, this Thursday card. There's only 5 games, but there's almost something going on in all of them. We'll start at the front. New York, Milwaukee. There's not a whole lot from a fantasy standpoint we're really watching for in this thing. Word on the street is that Frank Ntilikina might actually get to play for the Knicks, but it still seems like Emmanuel Mudiay has locked down the point guard job, and he'll just continue to roll up points league value along with Kevin Knox. Tim Hardaway Jr. might miss this game. Sounds like he's under the weather, so that would just create more opportunity for some of those other guys. And on the Milwaukee side, things are pretty normal. Milwaukee's favored by 14.5 points in this game. This is the gambling side of stuff, and it's the second half of a home and home. Remember, these two teams played in New York on Christmas Day. New York lost by 14 in that game, and so the inclination is to say, well, if they can keep it to 14, then maybe they should cover that number. I don't like this at all. I think Milwaukee played very poorly on Christmas Day outside of Giannis, and to me, if they put even a little bit of their best foot forward, this could be a run out early. So yes, that home and home thing, there's a desire to want to bet on the team that lost the first game of the home and home, but you really have to look to see who gave the better effort in game one. And I'm almost inclined to say that it was New York that gave the better effort in that first game, and they just got outclassed by Milwaukee. Do the Knicks have another one in the chamber to say, like, hey, yeah, let's compete with this team again? I don't know, because they already beat them one time, and sometimes that's enough. So this is one that I'm largely leaving alone. Sounds like James Harden is expecting to play for Houston. Boston favored by 2 on the road. That is a strange line, to be sure. This one opened, I believe, with the Rockets as a 1-point favorite and then just went screaming in the Celtics' direction. Not going to try to overanalyze the numbers on this thing, but it is interesting, and I wonder if people are expecting Kyrie Irving to go crazy again. I think it'll be a pretty good ball game, but I'm not going to read into it too much. Last 3 games on the docket, and from a fantasy standpoint, almost totally forgot about that one. Houston, we're watching Austin Rivers. No question. He's the guy to keep an eye on for the Houston Rockets. I think he's worth a look in points leagues. I don't think he's got the stat set for 9 category formats, and I'm going to stand by that statement for at least 1 game longer. Lakers are in Sacramento. Kings favored by 4. No LeBron, no Rondo on the LA side, which means a couple of things. Number one, I want to talk you guys off of immediately putting your life savings on the Kings. This was a game that I was planning to put my life savings on the Kings. I had circled it in red marker. But sometimes you have to erase your marker. Because to me, this was a great time to bet the Kings when they thought LeBron was coming to town. Remember, LeBron went in there and beat Sacramento early in the season. It was one of the first losses the Kings took this year when they were on that crazy hot run. And the Lakers came in and just said, we're the big dogs here, and rolled them in their arena. And so I'm looking at this like, oh my God, Sacramento gets to host the Lakers again right after Christmas. They're going to want to get some revenge. Lakers are coming in on a low after playing Golden State. And then LeBron went down, and it changes the dynamics of the game entirely. It brings in injured star theory stuff where the other guys in the Lakers are going to feel like they can play without LeBron. It takes the shine off the game, and for Sacramento, it takes some of their adrenaline away. And so for me, while it does fall under the revenge category, those other factors play a role. And so I'm not touching this thing. I will track it to see how it goes with the notes next to it that, hey, LeBron was a scratch in this one, and so the line shifted probably 5 points as a result. I figured this one was going to be around a pick'em, maybe Lakers by 1.5, and then I was betting the Kings. I figured they'd win this game outright. I don't know anymore. I would lean Lakers or nothing at all in this one because of the LeBron stuff. Philadelphia is in Utah. Jazz are favored by 5. Oh, by the way, from a fantasy perspective, I mentioned it earlier. I'm basically sitting on this thing, and I'm going to watch the first half and then make a call on the Lakers. LeBron's MRI came back negative, so the expectation is that he will probably be back in a couple of games. But let's watch this one, and if someone like Josh Hart goes crazy or KCP, then maybe there's an avenue to go for a 1 or 2 game stream. And I'm starting to get into that mode a little bit, guys. This time of year, in my leagues with a games cap, I'm trying to send a bunch of guys away. 2 for 1s, 2 for 2s, where I end up with the best player in the deal. And then I'll just fill in that extra roster spot with streaming pickups, guys that I think can give me 2 or 3 games of top 50 value. That's worthwhile in a games cap format. Use your games cap towards these really good guys. Whereas, if you're in a head-to-head league and you're looking towards the playoffs, you kind of want a guy that's going to be better for you later on in the year. That's a different beast. Utah and Philly is what we started to talk about a second ago. Utah's favored by 5. I think this is a good line. I think it's pretty fair. I like the Jazz in this one. They're on revenge. They lost in Philadelphia earlier this year. They've been playing really well of late, and I don't know if anybody's noticed, Utah's been good, like real good, since they got home off that weird road trip. They played really well. They lost a tight one mixed in there, flying into altitude from the West Coast on a back-to-back, and they only lost by 1 to the Thunder in that ball game. So this is a team that's playing well. Sixers are playing fine. I don't know that I'd say they've been playing great. They've been playing fine. They're going to get challenged in this one, specifically because the Jazz also have a guy. Al Horford does a good job on Joel Embiid and sort of forced the other Sixers to play well in that game against Boston, and a lot of them did. Jazz have a guy like that, too. His name is Rudy Gobert, and he's going to make life difficult around the rim. And certainly one of the things that Gobert can do that Horford doesn't really is protect the rim in addition to defending Embiid well. So you're going to need to see some ball movement out of Philadelphia if they want to compete in this thing. I like Utah. I like that the total is moving down. Makes me think there's going to be some defense in this thing. Jazz on revenge. That one looks like a decent one to me. And finally, the Blazers are in Golden State to take on the Warriors. Obviously, we've got one eye on Mo Harkless, but not much going on from a fantasy perspective in this game. Blazers are on revenge. They got blown out by the Warriors. Problem with this game, too, is that Golden State is coming off an embarrassing loss on Christmas. So you've got revenge on one side. You've got the embarrassing bounce back on the other. You've got 2 competing angles. I would consider leaving this thing alone. Probably a very small play on Portland, if anything. But in looking at this card, you've got Sacramento, Utah, and Portland all on revenge angles. The only one that doesn't have a different angle, sort of punching it right in the mouth, is Utah-Philly. The no LeBron and the Golden State Christmas Day memory really make me nervous about those other 2 things. But fear not, we will track them anyway. And that's your show, ladies and gents. I'm Dan Besbris. This is Fantasy NBA Today. Big thanks again to Mike Apotria at Mike Apotria on Twitter. Give him a follow. Tomorrow, DFS contest. The link is there. The lobby is open. Join us, won't you? And do as many as 3. You heard it from Mike. 3 available lineups in the same contest. Live with Brewski tomorrow, late morning Pacific time. We will talk to you then on YouTube. So long, everybody.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.